Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
People are ready to go, ready to start the day. Even as we have more good news.
Right. It's a little perverse.
I have a. I upgraded my equipment. I have a new camera that I'm going to use for filming. So I bought it last week. I was kind of thinking maybe I don't need it, and then sure enough, I definitely need it now. So
You just like gadgets.
that's true. I do like going into Best Buy, but I guess I won't be doing that for a while. We're supposed to have a bat mitzvah inside of our synagogue on August 1st, and I guess that's not going to happen now. So, but what we're doing with those is we're basically telling the young people you can do it next year and have the same Torah portion. So it's kind of weird. They have to almost wait a full year if they want to do the same portion. We've had some people that have opted to go earlier, but it means they have to learn a different section. But it's not easy, and it's hard to tell kids that they have to wait a year for anything. Kids are not good at delayed gratification. And what's so special about this is it's not like the kids wanted to have a party. They weren't doing this to have a party because they can't have a party. It's not like they were saying, "Oh, I just want my party." But I mean, maybe they wanted to get it over with. That could be it. But they didn't. It wasn't like they were going right from the service to a party, and so they wanted to have a party. They just wanted to do it, and yeah, it is weird. That's. I mean, I guess the wedding. We've had a few people who have just opted to do kind of like a elopement kind of thing or whatever. Just to do the ceremony. But you can't do that with a bar mitzvah. You have to have a community. You have to have
Good girl. Good girl.
Yeah, that's a tough one. So I wonder what kids. I was talking about this with somebody yesterday. What's going to happen to these young people who've grown up during this time? We're older, and our lives are pretty. We're not going to change a whole lot. I mean, we have to deal with these things. But we deal with them as we are. But I wonder what's going to happen to young people who've been shaped by this, whose adult times are still ahead of them, and what's going to happen to them? What are going to happen to kids? How is it going to affect them? So that's something to think about today, I guess. Your assignment today is think about how kids are going to remember this.
Do I think about anything else but the kids? I feel like it's constant.
I'm not even talking about your kids. Your kids are also already, no. I think anybody who hasn't had children yet of their own, I think any young person who hasn't taken on responsibilities of other people yet, whether a spouse, a relationship, I wonder what it'll do to them, because they are the ones who are going to have to, they're the ones who are going to take away these lessons of how people from them and their parents, their family, whatever. And it'll be interesting to see if they take away good lessons from this. I hope they do. By the way, I mean, it should be said that obviously some people take away really bad lessons from tough times, but generally speaking, when we think about it, we talk about people who've gone through really tough times, and they generally, our estimation is usually that they're better people. I mean, we call the greatest generation because they lived and fought and died and suffered through World War II. People who grew up during Depression, like unfortunately, I had a funeral yesterday for a woman in her 90s who still kind of grew up during the Depression. We talk about how that affected people. Oftentimes, we'll say they didn't spend money or they held on to stuff. They hoarded a little bit, or they ate differently, and finished everything that they had in front of them. But generally speaking, we don't oftentimes say that we're worse people for it. I mean, maybe we make fun of them a little bit, but we usually say they had a different set of priorities, a better set, maybe a better set, but a less warped sense of realities, maybe. Anyways, I hope these kids take away from it. Anyways, yeah, I have to have another tough talk with a family saying you can't have a bat mitzvah unless we go underground. Don't tell anybody. I don't think we can.
Did the rules change? You can't do the way we did it before with like 15 people in the place all spread out?
I can't tell. Based on what I'm hearing. Based on what I'm hearing, we can't. But
yeah, based on what I'm seeing, you can't do anything indoors.
You can have an outdoor bat mitzvah.
I think you can have it outside.
Yeah, you can't have it outside.
At 100
Can't
degrees.
do anything inside?
no,
That'll be interesting.
Not worship services. And they, by the way, they even came out yesterday and interviewed David Haig from Grace Baptist, trying to get him, egg him on, and trying to see if he would, go rogue. And he didn't. I mean, I think it was like Channel 5 or one of the local news channels came out here to try to see if he would be defiant. And he said, we're going to follow the law. So
Mark, you used to have a reputation for,
I know, but I didn't
getting in trouble.
I didn't defy the law. I tried to work within. I think I always worked. Didn't I always work within the law? I don't know. Maybe I did.
Except the whole tree thing.
I just sitting in a tree,
There's no conservative says they'll follow the law.
What?
I said
That's
it's
civil
news now
disobedience.
if a conservative says they'll follow the law.
That's right.
Yeah, I guess you're right. The tree pushed the margins, and I don't know. I mean, we stood up to the law, but we never pushed it. I mean, Reverend Lynn was with us when we yelled at the city council and told them they have to start taking care of the homeless, but that wasn't exactly.
Yeah, but I did it so nicely.
Yeah, we did. I wouldn't say that was going against the law. But I mean, you can make the argument if we got in front of the city council and demanded that we were going to have our places of worship open, then we would be defying them. I just think that seems a little
stupid.
Yeah, it seems a little stupid. Seems a little self-serving. I'm not going to get in front of the city council to argue for.
In the long run, it's not going to increase our number of congregants.
Yes, we did argue in front of the city council for our preschool, but we really didn't have to. We shouldn't have had. Unfortunately,
I was thinking about that yesterday, wasn't I?
Unfortunately, we had a flawed city council person. I'm not going to get into that right now, but it all ended up okay, right?
But he's retiring.
Sure, it did.
All right. Well, with that, without getting political, we're going to. I will not defy the law anymore. So we're going to get into. We'll get into the text.
Does that make you feel young, Mark?
No, it had the absolute opposite effect of making me feel really old, because the last year feels like 10. So I guess 10 years feels like 50. So yeah, it makes me feel old thinking of how long ago that stuff happened. So whatever. It is what it is.
How long ago was that? My son-in-law was up in the tree too, and I remember it clearly, but I don't remember when.
2000 and I want to say 2004. My daughter just asked me about it. She was little, and I think it was 2003 or 2004. But Judith was asking me about something yesterday that took place 10 years ago, and that seemed that seemed not good. That it was 10 years.
Well, but I was looking at, and this is an odd thing, I guess not, but I was looking at what I've done with my time besides parenting. Like, what have I done since I became a parent besides parenting? And I was trying to put together like when all this happened, like the preschool and the tree and the JCC and all that stuff.
Yeah, it is weird when you look back and think about, we date things usually by our kids and family events and those kind of things. But yeah, we were looking back. I think a lot of people would they have a little bit more time around the house or assembling photos and doing that kind of thing. I just found this old photo. This is me and my grandmother and Margaret Thatcher at some Jewish event.
Wow.
I found that photo. I was like,
Oh my goodness.
A child.
I know. Margaret Thatcher was not smiling in that picture, which I don't
How
think.
old were you?
Well,
Only
Margaret
Grandma
Thatcher had
Bernice
no
was
reason to
smiling.
smile.
I think I must have been about 25. 25. It was here in LA, but maybe 22. I don't know. Anyways, that's me and Margaret. There they are. It was some event. I
You're
found
much
it
better
and
looking than Margaret.
that- I just
I don't know
like-
about though. Grandma Bernice has it on both of you.
I just want to say that she didn't smile a lot. My grandmother looks very astoundingly happy compared to Margaret Thatcher. Anyways, there.
Well,
There
that's
you
sad.
She was not always smiling, my grandma. Always thinking about stuff.
Not one of my favorites.
No, but I'm just telling you,
Margaret?
it was a weird deal when we think about our time and how long time has passed.
Rabbi,
Yes,
today is 8 years since my husband passed away.
that's
Today,
amazing.
Uh,
It's
8
amazing.
years
right?
today.
I can't
We
believe
met. We
It
met
might be a
right.
blessing.
That's when we met you right around that time.
exactly.
That's amazing. And I'll tell you, Diane, honestly, you look fantastic right now. I wanna tell you,
Fantastic.
You've
Amazing what 50 pounds will do for you.
Wow.
You
Look good.
look absolutely glowing. So
Thank
I
you.
want to tell you that time has been
Thank
Time
you.
has been very good to our friend. Diane.
I gained your 50.
I was wondering where it went.
That's where it was right
I
in
got
it.
a couple.
You don't need to look for it anymore. Well, I actually did put on a COVID-19, as I told people, but I've lost a lot of it over the last 2 weeks. I gave up everything. So in addition to having to deal with all this goodness, I gave up everything I wanted to eat over the last few weeks. So we're gonna share. No one needs to hear that on Facebook, but we're gonna go on to Facebook right now. And the good thing is that it's the summertime, so everyone's burning a little bit of extra calories just going outdoors and trying to breathe outside. You lose a few extra calories. That's I guess one of the
I've
benefits
got to go then.
of the summertime. Yeah, we went on a nice bike ride Sunday to Culver City, that area. It was really nice.
You rode your bike to Culver City?
No, we took our bikes to Culver City, and then we rode from there to the marina along the Bologna
Oh,
wetlands, which I recommend is a very flat, very easy to do trail, walking, biking, and it's a set aside trail. It's like the trails out here in Santa Clarita where you don't have to have any cars go by you. It's just other walkers and bikers. So it's the Bologna Creek bike trail. So I definitely recommend it for people who like to bike or walk. And it's 25 degrees cooler. So we're talking about a twisted love story today. Not one that you want to, you'd think, not one you'd want to use as a role model for love in any way. But here's the weird thing, folks. It was a role model for love in a lot of cultures. And as we showed the picture last week, it is...
Someone needs to go on mute.
Yeah, no, I'll take care of it. Don't worry, Mike. I'll unmute yourself as you're coming back in, but yes. We have a love story that's maybe an example of what not to do, but yet people found in it inspiration, as I mentioned last week, especially the Muslim community, and the fact that this story of Joseph and as she's called Zuleika later on in Jewish tradition and in Islamic tradition, they found a love story that kind of was an inspiration because it's in the Quran. It's a very long section, Joseph's story, and so they used it as a motif. And then I shared some of the art that was inspired by the story in both Christian sources and in Islamic sources. In Islamic sources, it's interesting because harems and slavery were kind of more part of the society. These stories were somewhat relevant. I mean, obviously there was slavery in Christian communities as well, but there was an understood and implied and accepted form of sexual relationships between slaves and masters, which it happened in the Christian community, but I'd hardly say that it was accepted or kind of talked about. And in Islam, and especially in like Persian court stories, it was much more open to discussion. And so we have these, I mean, you have this holy story that the Muslims got from the Bible that they accepted, that they talked about, and that they embellished and ran with. So I'm not going to get that into it in the Midrash, but just understand that by the time of Islam, the Midrash was already well known. It was used by Muslim scholars. Clearly, there are references in the Quran to parts of the story that are not in the Torah, that are only in the Midrash. So it's interesting that we can kind of see that it wasn't just the Torah that early Muslims drew from. It was also the Midrash, which again, we know Christian scholars drew from as well. But it actually shows us that Midrash, to some extent, became canon in other faiths, and especially again in the story of Joseph. So, as I said, the surah, the chapter in the Quran is pretty long. It's 111 verses, and so it's a pretty long section, which I encourage you, if you want, to read. Maybe I'll share it so that you can see the link. But what we read last week is just the beginning of the story, how Joseph comes into the house. Zuleika is attracted to him right away. Actually, in some versions of the Midrash, she makes Potiphar bring him in. And we read last week this kind of horrible story that Zuleika would sometimes get Joseph to come to her and kind of take on a motherly or matronly, I don't really say a motherly tone with him to try to take advantage of him. And that's what we read last time, and we were beginning this new page. It says that Joseph again would rebuff her and would pray, and would, as we read last week, he would fast, and he gave his own food to the poor and the sick. So he does kind of like a double mitzvah. He doesn't sleep with this married woman, and he also gives away his food to the poor. And the weird thing, of course, is that even though he's giving up his food, he's still thriving, because as we've read in the Daniel Midrash, and we've come across it in other places too, that people, when they're serving God, even if they're not eating, they're fed by the Holy Spirit and they look okay. And it says that Joseph, even though he should have looked sickly as he was on his diet, he didn't. He looked good. And I guess maybe that's the lesson. If you want to go on a diet, give your food to the poor, and do it for a good reason too. And as I said last week, it was a Jewish tradition to fast 3 times a week. So Mondays and Thursdays, and then usually one other day. Not Shabbat, you're not allowed to fast, but there are other days you're supposed to fast. And remember, when you look at the other fast days that we have on the Jewish calendar, and we actually had one last week, on Thursday, we had the fast of Tammuz, Tzom Tammuz. There's 25 days of the year that we fast. So for those who are practicing intermittent fasting, you can do that and be holy at the same time. I'm not encouraging 3-day-a-week fast, by the way. I just want to put that out there. Not a doctor, and I'm not encouraging that. But that was Jewish. There were Jews that did it. So again, this story, the versions of the story, the Midrash, we're not sure when they first, I mean, some of them are very early. And then there are versions of it that were probably being written still as Islam was developing. That was a kind of, to answer your question, Marina, the stories about Zuleika appear over a long period of time and definitely reflect different cultures. So there's a strain of these stories that sounds a lot like the Greco-Roman types of slavery. There are versions of this that sound more Middle Eastern. There are versions of this that clearly were built on other versions. There's actually a wonderful, well, I think it's a wonderful book about biblical exegesis, which is the fancy way of saying this. It's called In Potiphar's House, done by James Kugel, who was a professor of Bible at Harvard for many years and is actually an Orthodox Jew who kind of always has danced around the documentary hypothesis. But he doesn't, that's not the point of In Potiphar's House. It's a Harvard University Press. I'm looking it up right now. It came out in 1994. He looks at the Joseph narrative specifically in Genesis and then how they were taken up in Midrash, early Christian writings, liturgical poetry, and the Quran, often containing, again, details that are not in the Bible, but were in the Midrash, and how these stories developed over time and how he tries to date them. So Marina, if you really want to learn more about how these stories, if you Potiphar, Judith says with a fine, what did you write, Judith? The fine.
Because of the guy's last name.
Yes, Potiphar. Yeah. So Kugel's book is a really good. He just wrote a Bible translation, by the way, too, that some people liked and some people didn't like. But his probably best book for a person just getting into this is the Bible as it's called The Bible as It Was. Again, some people are not fans of Kugel, but I mean, I think he's, I know Judah, say it again, but there are I think he's got some interesting stuff to say. I think some people just knock people right off the bat if they're from Harvard, but he has brought an interesting view to this as a person who tries to be traditional and respect the Jewish traditions about where things come from, but at the same time, like, well, this is the way it is. So, yeah, enjoy and enjoy some Kugel, some low-calorie Kugel. So Potiphar is got Joseph in his house. He's got Zuleika, his wife, or we don't have her name even in the Bible, as we said. She's doing stuff to try to get close to him. So let's read what she does. This is the Midrash, because as we showed you last week, there's only a few verses of it in the Torah, but it is in the Torah. I mean, this relationship is in the Torah. All right. Rosemary, would you like to start with the wife of Potiphar?
Okay. The wife of Potiphar would frequently speak to her husband in praise of Joseph's chastity, in order that he might conceive no suspicion of the state of her feelings. And again, she would encourage Joseph secretly, telling him not to fear her husband, that he was convinced of his purity of life, and though one should carry tales to him about Joseph and herself, Potiphar would lend them no credence. And when she saw that all this was ineffectual, she approached him with a request that he teach her the word of God, saying, "If it be your wish that I forsake idol worship, then fulfill my desire, and I will persuade that Egyptian husband of mine to abjure the idols, and we shall walk in the law of your God." Joseph replied, "The Lord desires not that those who fear him should walk in impurity, nor has he pleasure in the adulterer."
Yeah, so it's an interesting midrash, and one that probably, again, reflects a reality that probably happens sometimes, which were that Greco-Roman women would attach themselves to a Jewish guy, and kind of one of the conditions would be that he would serve, she would serve God. She would become a Jew in exchange for consummate, the relationship, whatever you want to say. I'm sure it happened the other way. It seems as though, to some extent, even the Bible tells us that, and that King Solomon starts erecting pagan shrines because of his foreign wives. So we don't know, could be, could be a reality all over the place. But there is this kind of weird story and theme motif that we have in the Midrash and in the Talmud of Roman women that would take on Judaism. And I guess sometimes it was done for a relationship, but other times it just seems like they were interested in Judaism. And then of course, later on in Christianity, that it was oftentimes women that did it. And I there is that theme that goes on, and you'll see in the different midrashim that are collected here, you'll see that that's a theme, is that she makes a religious connection between his unwillingness to be with her and the thought that if she simply becomes Jewish, then that will fix everything. And Joseph points out, you can't do that. You can't become part of the faith and in the process be committing a sin. So he says it doesn't work like that. And it kind of in a way is establishing something about the faith, about what makes Judaism different, is that it's not just about what God you worship. It's not just putting away your idols. It's not worshiping God. It's about what you're doing. You can't do this. And again, I would say that Judaism and then later on Christianity and then later on Islam kind of pick up this story for that reason, because they recognize that Joseph is in this crazy power position where, what if the woman did say this to him? What if she did say, look, I'll become a follower of God if you just give yourself over to me? And there was this kind of like lesson here. Now, obviously it goes towards sexual relationships, but there's a bigger point here, which is you can't serve God and give up your soul at the same time. It doesn't work that way. And so there's this is a perfect example of, and a sexual example, which is even more exciting and dramatic and, everything else going on here with this backdrop, which are basically saying, look, this isn't about choosing which team you're on. This is about what you're doing every day. So it doesn't make sense, Zuleika, for you to do this. So that doesn't work. But again, we're going to come back to this Zuleika wanting to be Jewish motif. But let's keep going.
Another time she came to him and said, if you will not do my desire, I will murder the Egyptian and wed with you according to the law. At this, Joseph rent his garment, and he said, O woman, fear the Lord and do not execute this evil deed, that you may not bring destruction down upon yourself, for I will proclaim your impious purposes to all in public.
Yeah, so now when she doesn't work, she says, oh, we'll kill him and then we'll be together. What does he do? He basically says, I'll tell people. You can't do that, So that's how far she's willing to go.
It's interesting that he thinks his testimony will be believed, though. I mean, usually.
Well, yeah. And that story works because of that. Mm-hmm. Really, Joseph? And it also works because the people who wrote it knew the ending of the story, which is he's going to have to testify and he won't be believed. Well, by the way, hold off on whether the Bible really says he wasn't believed, because what is Potiphar really going to do? And by the way, one of the best dramatic versions of this, because he's a pretty good actor, there was as I mentioned, there was a pretty good Bible movie version done broadcast on TNT. Talk about how many years ago, it was over 20 years ago that they did. And I don't remember the guy who played Joseph, but the guy who played Potiphar was a guy named Ben Kingsley. And Ben Kingsley plays Potiphar. And when he's put in this situation, we know he believes Joseph, but what's he going to do? He can't take a slave's, testimony over his own wife. He's stuck. So the easy answer to this all, which is in the background, is if Joseph really is a problem, if Joseph really is doing all these things, Potiphar has a really easy answer, which is he kills him and dumps his body out in the trash because he's a slave, and he doesn't have to think twice about it. He doesn't have to, according to Egyptian law, he's got an object in his house. So if he really did believe his wife, would he have kept Joseph even alive? So keep that in mind too. Yeah, this is the kind of the Joseph thinking, people will believe me. All right.
Again, she sent him a dish prepared with magic spells, by means of which she hoped to get him into her power. But when the eunuch set it before him, he saw the image of a man handing him a sword together with the dish. And warned by the vision, he took good care not to taste of the food. A few days later, his mistress came to him and asked him why he had not eaten of what she had sent him. He reproached her, saying, "How could you tell me I do not come near the idols, but only to the Lord? The God of my fathers has revealed your iniquity to me through an angel, but that you may know that the malice of the wicked has no power over those who fear God in purity, I shall eat your food before your eyes, and the God of my fathers and the angel of Abraham will be with me." The wife of Potiphar fell upon her face at the feet of Joseph, and amid tears, she promised not to commit this sin again.
Wow. So
a little Egyptian fragility here.
Yeah. So, there's a whole bunch of stuff going on there about the Egyptians and about what kind of stuff they do. Yeah, Leslie Ann Warren played Potiphar's wife. Thank you, Don Kogan. And yeah, it was a long time ago. So Leslie Ann Warren, ironically, by the way, is Jewish. Most people don't know that, but they had a Jewish woman playing Potiphar's wife, Zuleika. But yeah, this is again, her being Egyptian to some extent, casting spells. This is another very Egyptian thing to do. We know the Egyptians were good at casting spells, which is why they
Pharaoh has all those magicians.
Yeah, in that magician battle for Pharaoh that we have in the Torah and Exodus. So yeah, so this kind of like builds on that motif. I want to show you one thing, since we talked about it, and I want you to see what I'm talking about in the Quran, how the Quran is clearly basing this on Midrash. So this is the Quran chapter. This is, again, the surah called Joseph. And this is the way they tell the story. And I want you to see how they took the Midrash. It's clear that they took this Midrash. This is the part where we get to seducing him. And she in whose house he was, sought to seduce him. Again, it doesn't call her Zuleika here. She closed the doors and said, "Come you, I seek the refuge of Allah." Again, I'm going to become a follower of God, right? So that theme. Indeed, he is my master who has made good my residence. Indeed, wrongdoers will not succeed. Kind of a similar thing. And she's certainly determined to seduce him, and would have inclined to her had he not seen the proof of his Lord, and thus that we should avert from evil and immorality. Indeed, he was our chosen servant, talking about Joseph. So here it says that Joseph would have given himself over to her if God hadn't proven him that, his existence, if you will. We're going to get to that. And here we have, and they raced to the door. She tore his shirt from the back and found her husband at the door. She said, what is the recompense of one who intended evil for your wife, but that he be imprisoned or painful punishment? And Joseph said, it was she who sought to seduce me. And a witness from the family testified, if his shirt is torn from the front, she has told the truth. And if he is, and he is of the truth, and he is of the liars. But if the shirt is torn from the back, then she has lied and he is truthful. So when the husband saw the shirt torn from the back, he said, indeed, it is the woman's plan. Indeed, your plan is great. So this is the Quran version of what you're reading right now. And you can see it's based on the Midrash. And we're going to get into this for you to see. This is a perfect example of why Midrash had such a big effect on the world, because to some extent, again, that is no longer a Midrash. That's part of the Quran. That's how powerful and how well known the story was. So,
Rabbi, when was the Quran written?
I don't want to answer that question on grounds that I could get in trouble. Let's say that it exists in its form that we have by about the 7th century, late 7th century, mid 7th century. Let's say that. So there are different texts of the Quran. There wasn't one text of it. And again, we're finding different, understandings of, versions of biblical text too. I mean, the fact that the Septuagint has texts that we don't have in our Tanakh. So let me be very careful about that. But it was started to be compiled after his death. And again, it's hard to say for sure how much of it was in its final form by the 7th century. But interestingly, most of the Midrash that you're reading was already finished by then. Some of it that we're reading is late, is Middle Ages, but almost all of it that we're reading was completed by about the 4th or 5th century. So it was well known by those times. And again, it seems as though, the theory at least is, and I guess I can say this without, fear of anything, is that Muhammad came into contact with Jewish traders who would have been familiar with the Midrash. And so, that effect was natural, that it wouldn't have necessarily, there was not necessarily separation between the Torah and the Midrash. Again, we see this in Josephus. Josephus uses the Midrash in his retelling of the Bible, which is called the Antiquities of the Jews. We can see how he used Midrash. So he does it where he doesn't say, oh, this is from the Torah and this is Midrash. He just is recounting it with the Midrash there. So just understand that by the 1st century, I mean, by the time of Josephus, who lived at the time of the destruction of the temple, people were talking, they were saying Midrash, they were teaching Midrash, they were like it's Torah. They didn't separate it. And you can understand why. The stories are beautiful, they're inspirational, they're fill in the blanks, and people just, they started telling the stories with them. So it's not surprising that by 700s, early 700s, these were well-known stories amongst Jews. So what else did she do? What else did this woman try?
But her unholy passion for Joseph did not depart from her, and her distress over her unfulfilled wish made her look so ill that her husband said to her, "Why is your countenance fallen?" And she replied, "I have a pain at my heart, and the groanings of my spirit oppress me." Once, when she was alone with Joseph, she rushed toward him, crying, "I will throttle myself, or I will jump into a well or a pit if you will not yield yourself to me." Noticing her extreme agitation, Joseph endeavored to calm her with these words: "Remember, if you make away with yourself, your husband's concubine, Asteho, your rival, will maltreat your children and extirpate your memory from the earth." These words, gently spoken, had the opposite effect from that intended. They only inflamed her passion the more by feeding her hopes. She said, "There, see you, you do love me now. It suffices for me that you take thought for me and for the safety of my children. I expect now that my desire will be fulfilled." She did not know that Joseph spoke as he did for the sake of God and not for her sake.
Yeah. So this is the problem. Anything he says is going to be taken by her as an indication that he loves her. And this is it's a problem in that he doesn't have he has nothing he can do. I mean, he literally, anything he tries to do becomes it spurs her on and he has no out. He has no way of emerging from this. It's interesting. I'm going to just throw out something that kind of weird that I've noticed before. And maybe it's a coincidence, but it's a weird coincidence. There have been a few movie versions of this, as I mentioned. There was the Joseph one that was done on TNT. There was also one done which wasn't seen by a lot of people, but I think it's it's got some good stuff in it. It was done on it was a straight to video done by DreamWorks. It's Joseph, King of Dreams. It was the follow-up to Prince of Egypt. So it's called Joseph, King of Dreams. And it was Ben Affleck was the voice. And again, you got to look at the voices as the actors, if you will. But the woman who played Zuleika, the role was Judith Light. So I think it's interesting that the women who are playing the people who are playing Joseph are not Jewish, but the people playing Zuleika are Jewish. The women chasing after Joseph are the ones that are Jewish. It's weird. It's a weird inversion of the Joseph story. I'm going to look up other versions of this later to see if there are other versions where the Zuleika role was played by a Jewish woman. So I don't know. Think about that one for a second. Why is Joseph not Jewish, but the woman chasing after him is? Yeah, this is unfortunately a reality that when people have a stalker, have somebody who is not giving up on the relationship, there's anything that you say is twisted and turned into attention. And there's a truth to this that's really, really scary, especially given the fact that he's in a very uncomfortable power position here, to say the least. Let's keep going.
His mistress, or as she was called, Zuleika, pursued him day after day with her amorous talk and her flattery, saying, "How fair is your appearance? How comely your form? Never have I seen so well-favored a slave as you are." Joseph would reply, "God who formed me in my mother's womb has created all men."
So here we're going to have a dialogue between Joseph and Zuleika, which inspired other poetry, including the very famous Islamic poet Rumi, who did a whole poem of Joseph and Zuleika, which again had mystical overtones. But the bottom line is, this is not the fact that this became a beautiful love story, if you will, inspirational story, you wouldn't get that from the situation on the face of it. That's all I can tell you.
It's a little creepy.
It's very creepy. And again, even though it's a what I said at the beginning is my attempt to put it into historical and cultural context, which is for people who lived this kind of world in this kind of reality where this could happen. Maybe it wasn't as creepy, but it's really, really, really tough to read in a way because it reminds you how institutionalized and how, through a lot of human history, how normal these kinds of things are. And I mean, again, I don't want to make a more global comment on it, but do think about the fact that where we are today, we've accelerated fast through this reality, which was a reality for people 150, 200 years ago. So just remember that, the Me Too, to go from Me Too to from where we were here, it's hard to imagine how fast the acceleration's been in just the last couple hundred years. So keep that in mind. All right, let's read this dialogue and I'll go through it.
Zuleika, how beautiful are your eyes, with which you have charmed all Egyptians, both men and women. Joseph, beautiful as they may be while I am alive, so ghastly they will be to look upon in the grave. Zuleika, how lovely and pleasant are your words. I pray you take your harp, play, and also sing, that I may hear your words. Joseph, lovely and pleasant are my words when I proclaim the praise of my God. Zuleika, how beautiful is your hair. Take my golden comb and comb it. Joseph, how long will you continue to speak thus to me? Leave off. It were better for you to care for your household. Zuleika, there is nothing in my house that I care for, save you alone. But Joseph's virtue was unshaken. While she spoke thus, he did not so much as raise his eyes to look at his mistress. He remained equally steadfast when she lavished gifts upon him, for she provided him with garments of one kind for the morning, another for noon, and a third kind for the evening.
And by the way, that gets to Joseph's really liking clothes.
Yes.
He was a little bit of a fashion person, right?
Fashionista.
Yeah. But by the way, this story doesn't, figure out how this plays to some extent also with the idea of his gender identity, if you will, too, because here he is, being the ultimate object of desire for a woman when, elsewhere in the Midrash, especially, he's kind of put forward as being effeminate, and keep that in mind. And because these stories all kind of get woven together, and they're all part of the bigger context of the Joseph story. Think about how this issue of kind of being an object of desire, but at the same time unattainable, if you will. Think about how that plays out, because that is here. Make no mistake about it. In the Midrash, it is definitely here. It's not, maybe not even hinted at in the Bible, but it is 100% here, which is that, we thought Joseph, and again, the rabbis have they do it repeatedly. They knock his masculinity, if you will, and now in the Midrash, this idea is accentuated with his being the object of desire. Keep that in mind, because it is a weird, and again, think about how that plays out in other cultures and our culture, and that this story is here. This theme is here in this text, and today, maybe in our current world, it's a story that is played with even more commonly in our media, because people are much more open about their sexuality and their identity, that these stories have a different way of playing out because of our acceptance, or whatever you want to say, our expectations even But remember that is going on here in a culture where for the most part, in cultures of weird kinds of understanding that this exists, but at the same time, we're not going to talk about it. We're not going to, in the Jewish community at least, we're not going to encourage it. And so keep that in mind. That is here 100%. If you see it, it's because it's there. All right. So offers him clothes, which he would have liked. Okay.
Nor could threats move him. She would say, I will bring false accusations against you before your master. And Joseph would reply, the Lord executes judgment for the oppressed. Or, I will deprive you of food. Whereupon Joseph, the Lord gives food to the hungry. Or, I will have you thrown into prison. Whereupon Joseph, the Lord loosens the prisoners. Or, I will put heavy labor upon you that will bend you double. Whereupon Joseph, the Lord raises up them that are bowed down. Or, I will blind your eyes. Whereupon Joseph, the Lord opens the eyes of the blind.
Yeah, and these are all blessings that we see every day. Part of the morning blessings. God opens the eyes of the blind. God lifts up those who are fallen. God releases the prisoners. All of these, all these are part of the morning blessings that we say. So he's saying, anything you do to me, God will fix. So listen, she's trying everything. And then in her desperation, she's threatening him physically. What's interesting is she threatens to do exactly what she ends up doing, which is bring false accusations against him. So at least in the Midrash, she threatens to do exactly what she does before she does it. And again, so in the Midrash, he knows that this is a possibility. And so that is a theme that exists here, which is that she does everything possible, threatens him, and even threatens him with what she ends up doing. So listen to this part. This is an interesting part of the story.
When she began to exercise her blandishments upon him, he rejected them with the words, I fear my master. But Zuleika would say, I will kill him. Joseph replied with indignation, not enough that you would make an adulterer of me, you would have me be a murderer besides? And he spoke furthermore, saying, I fear the Lord my God. Zuleika, nonsense. He is not here to see you. Joseph, great is the Lord and highly to be praised, and his greatness is unsearchable. Thereupon she took Joseph into her chamber, where an idol hung above the bed. This she covered, that it might not be a witness of what she was about to do. Joseph said, though you cover up the eyes of the idol, remember the eyes of the Lord run to and fro through the whole earth. Yes, continued Joseph, I have many reasons not to do this thing for the sake of God. Adam was banished from paradise on account of violating a light command. How much more should I have to fear the punishment of God were I to commit so grave a sin as adultery? The Lord is in the habit of choosing a favorite member of our family as a sacrifice to himself. Perhaps he desires to make choice of me, but if I do your will, I make myself unfit to be a sacrifice to God. Also, the Lord is in the habit of appearing suddenly in visions of the night to those that love him. Thus did he appear to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and I fear that he may appear to me at the very moment while I'm defiling myself with you. And as I fear God, so I fear my father, who withdrew the birthright from his firstborn son Reuben on account of an immoral act and gave it to me. Were I to fulfill your desire, I would share the fate of my brother Reuben.
So here's Joseph drawing on the Bible itself in this Midrash, right? So Joseph is now going back to the text. And so it's interesting to see, obviously through Joseph's words, how the rabbis read these stories. One of the first that's interesting is look at the different approach that Judaism takes to original sin than Christianity does, which is that what Adam did in the Garden of Eden was nothing. And what's interesting about it is that they don't look at least in the Midrash, they don't look at it as like the great sin. They look at it as an interesting way that we sometimes read the story. which is, I mean, there is obviously the basic, hey, human beings chose knowledge of good and evil over eternal life. I mean, that's obviously part of the important, maybe the real part of the story. I mean, I don't want to say the real part, but there's a feeling that I have that is what the story is meant to tell us. We traded not being animals for not living in the paradise of not having these kinds of consciousness. That's the story on a basic level. But there's this other takeaway that we have in Judaism, which is that you and I, we have many, many commandments that we have to follow. 613 according to the famous calculation, what the 613 are is a matter of debate. And again, that's especially a rabbinic, you argue about everything, including how we organize the mitzvot. But 613 commandments in the Torah, and even more in the rabbinic text, even more in the Talmud, thousands of mitzvot. Adam couldn't follow one. So when we talk about why are humans the way they are, the rabbis basically say, look, we can't follow one commandment. And the guy, because he couldn't follow one commandment, got thrown out of the garden. Now I'm being asked to break a commandment that's worse than that, which is strange because that's the way the rabbis read this, that if Joseph sleeps with Zuleika, he's breaking a bigger commandment than Adam did. So that's a completely different reading of sin, and that sin, if you will. I don't want to necessarily, we didn't call it original sin, so I'm not going to say that. But the rabbi's reading of Adam's sin is such that was nothing compared to the sin that you may be doing today, which again is the lesson. It's not Joseph, it's not, somebody else in the Bible, it's you and I. That if you think what Adam did was bad, that's nothing compared to what you're about to do. So that's a really interesting thing that they just put out there. But there's also this direct connection that Joseph makes to his brother Reuben, who slept with Bilhah, and also engages in a sexual, violation of sexual rules, family rules. It's not a nice thing to do to sleep with your stepmother. So he is reminding himself, telling her, I'm not going to wind up with the same future that these people did. And, you can cover up an idol's eyes, God's going to see it. So here you see Joseph, he's in an interesting situation. He's not saying, he's explaining why it's wrong to do this. He's not saying, I'm not going to do it. He's not saying, I don't want to sleep with you. He's saying, I can't sleep with you because of these reasons. And so this is the theme that we have in the Midrash, which again is where the Quran picked up, and we're going to see it here. Joseph's a human being. It's not like he doesn't have desires or physical attractions. That's the interesting thing that's kind of like assumed in this too, which is that he's not saying, I don't find you attractive, I don't want to sleep with you. He's saying, I can't because of these reasons. And so again, one of the other reasons he gives is that I'm going to lose my ability to talk to God. If I'm sleeping with you, maybe that's the night that God comes and talks to me. And God's going to look at me and say, I'm not talking to this guy. He's sleeping with a married woman. So that's his
set up a hierarchy of sin.
It's interesting. You got to take that away a little bit. But the interesting thing here is there is this understanding in Judaism, I think, that there's things that we do that are, like we could do a little bit better with that. And then there's ones that we do that are, look, I'm not going to belabor the fact, but, this is one of the big 10, committing adultery. And this would, without a question, be under the rubric of adultery. This is a big one that he doesn't want to break. And he's not saying he's perfect, but he's saying, look, if God's going to talk to me too, if I'm going to be like, and remember at this time he's had dreams, but he's not 100% sure that God's going to speak to him like God spoke to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob before him. Because remember, up until this time, all of these kids, all the kids of Jacob, they're probably wondering, hey, I know God talked to my dad. Is God going to talk to us? And that's an interesting thing to think about here too. I mean, obviously, this issue.
But when he has his visions, isn't that sort of God speaking to him?
Yeah, but it's a different, he has to interpret them, and he has to, I mean, he seems to know, look, he has faith, and he seems to know that God is capable of doing this, but up until now, maybe again, God only came to him at night, but there is this tradition he has in his family that his family has. And remember, all the sons are thinking about this now at this time is, God spoke to my dad and my grandfather, great grandfather. Is God going to talk to me? Is God going to give me a direct message? And to some extent, that's what makes Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob different. Until we get to Moses, we don't have somebody that talks to God like the patriarchs do, obviously. So everybody who reads the Bible recognizes that there is a familiarity that these people have with God that even the later prophets don't have. They don't have the ability. They get visions and they get prophecies put to them. They see angels, but they don't have a relationship with God. And again, maybe that's one of the ways that God pulls back from human affairs is by not dealing with people, on a one-to-one like that, which is why, in Christianity and Islam, we have a reappearance of God talking to people directly because people wanted it. They didn't want to think that God, I should say to that extent, LDS church, that God continues to talk to people because people want it. And Joseph is expressing a very human desire here, which is, I want to talk to God. And if I sleep with you, I'm going to take myself out of the running of being somebody that God's going to talk to. So this is, he recognizes that he's maybe had dreams so far, but not necessarily, a conversation with God, something that God has appeared in. And in the Bible and in Jewish tradition, we understand there's a difference that dreams might be put there by God, but that's different than having a conversation with God. That talking to God, even at night, even in a dream, which they kind of recognize is not the same as God appearing to. By the way, this is an important issue because it is in the Bible. The difference between God speaking to someone face to face in broad daylight is different than God coming to somebody at night. There is a hierarchy there when it comes to dreams and visions, which need to be interpreted. God talking to you at night, and then God talking to you in broad daylight. 100%, there is a difference, and the fact that, again, whether an angel came to you in broad daylight, the angels usually come to you during the day. There usually isn't this, well, the angel came at night, and the angels can come during the day, but it's not God coming during the day. So there is a hierarchy and there's a placement of that, and the Bible says so. At the end of the Torah, at the end of Deuteronomy, we read, and we'll read it in a couple months, when we say goodbye to Moses, it says that God spoke to Moses face to face. And that is, the kind of special relationship that Moses had. And Joseph doesn't want to lose whatever he's going to have. He doesn't want to lose it. He doesn't want to lose it for sure. When he doesn't know, maybe he's the son who is going to have that special relationship. Again, but keep in mind, he is a man. He has desires. Let's put it that way. Okay.
Can you scroll it back down?
Yeah.
Thank you. With such words, Joseph endeavored to cure the wife of his master of the wanton passion she had conceived for him, while he took heed to keep far from a heinous sin, not from fear of the punishment that would follow, nor out of consideration for the opinion of men, but because he desired to sanctify the name of God, blessed be he, before the whole world. It was this feeling of his that Zuleika could not comprehend. And when, finally, carried away by passion, she told him in unmistakable language what she desired, and he recoiled from her, she said to Joseph, "Why do you refuse to fulfill my wish? Am I not a married woman? None will find out what you've done. Joseph replied, if the unmarried women of the heathen are prohibited to us, how much more their married women? As the Lord lives, I will not commit the crime you bid me do. In this, Joseph followed the example of many pious men who utter an oath at the moment when they are in danger of succumbing to temptation and seek thus to gather moral courage to control their evil instincts.
Okay, so that's Joseph's rationalization again of trying to figure out how to follow the law. There's an interesting comment, which again, I know everybody wants to get into right now. The fact that she says, I'm a married woman. I'm not going to talk about it. I'm a married woman.
She's just saying if she gets pregnant, there won't be a problem.
That's an interesting understanding of it too, which is.
But there's also in a lot of cultures the idea that it's okay, not exactly okay, but kind of French.
Yeah, I think that there's she's put him in this weird situation where she's taken the tack that, yeah, I'm married, shouldn't matter. And he's saying, are you kidding me? That's even worse. And so that is, it actually kind of shows you a little bit of the Jewish take on sexuality, which again is different from, as Rosemary just pointed out, even from more modern cultures. But at the time, must have been a little strange. And Jews who did allow for, still at this time in the rabbinic period, it was being phased out, but it was still around, that there still was polygamy. This understanding that no, adultery is adultery, and it doesn't matter whether the woman is unmarried or married. And her trying to put a hierarchy on that doesn't fly with him. There also is this, and it's not a throwaway line at all, that Joseph has, Joseph's example is something that other people have had to deal with, that other people have had to go through this situation. And it is that there are times when people have to figure out what's their out, and it's a tough situation. And don't think that just because it's a man, and that's really one of the takeaways of this story. I mean, it's a flip of the maybe the assumed normal power structure, but don't think that men don't get into these situations where they really don't have, what are they going to do? And it happens. Believe me, it happens. And sometimes it ends okay, and sometimes it doesn't end okay. They really are in a situation where there is a power play it's going on, and it is, you can understand why people make bad decisions when they have really no decisions are good, or they feel that no decision's good. I mean, you hope that justice will prevail, but it doesn't always happen that way, and people don't always have the ability to do that. I mean, nowadays you can record somebody, and you have your phone, you can put it on and record a conversation, but it's not an easy situation. And again, is a reason why many rabbis who are men are encouraged to not have a conversation with a congregant unless the door is open, and a single person. That is recommendation that is out there for people. So not to have meetings in the synagogue when no one else is there, those kind of things. So and again, it goes obviously both directions, but not always people assume it's always women who are being harassed by men, and it's not always the case. I mean, this story, I like to point out, it's the first example of harassment in the Bible, and it's the opposite way. And again, the Bible does that a lot, especially when it comes to sexuality. It takes the thing you thought was the way it always happens and twists it. And again, it's because it did usually happen the other way. But the Bible has a way of flipping it and letting you know, don't think that this doesn't happen. And maybe in a weird way, and this is why some people say the Bible was written by a woman, or parts of it, this being a J story, that parts of it are written by women, because maybe a woman writer wanted to make men think about what they were doing by putting them in as not really the protagonist, but really kind of the victim in the story. Because think about it, the first story of rape in the Bible is a story of Lot being raped sexually assaulted by his daughters, and Noah being sexually assaulted or victimized by his son. So don't think that these stories aren't there for a reason to flip, to have us maybe think about, especially men who are reading it and studying it and everything else, to maybe think about what it's like to be a victim. Just something to think about. When I read these stories, I can't I can't avoid confronting this and going, there is something really amazing about the way the Bible puts these stories in a frame that maybe would make men more sensitized to it. Maybe not. It didn't fix it, but it is an example. It is something we can turn to as an example. So she is, we're going to get to a very famous story. It's actually the text that Kugel uses in Potiphar's house is kind of his text to show us how Midrash developed a wonderful story that's not in the text at all. Okay, let's go. I went too far, yeah.
No, I think yeah.
Okay, yeah. Here we go.
Here we go. When Zuleika could not prevail upon him to persuade him, her desire threw her into a grievous sickness. And all the women of Egypt came to visit her, and they said to her, "Why are you so languid and wasted, you that lack nothing? Is not your husband a prince, great and esteemed in the sight of the king? Is it possible that you can want anything of what your heart desires?" Zuleika answered them, saying, "This day shall it be made known to you whence comes the state wherein you see me."
So here's, again, this story, not in the Bible, maybe not even hinted at. It's a wonderful story. Let's read what happens in this. Zuleika, again, her friends are saying, why are you so messed up? Why are you sick? Why are you psychologically not, why are you drinking so much, Zuleika? Whatever they saw as the warning signs that she was not doing well. Watch this story.
She commanded her maidservants to prepare food for all the women, and she spread a banquet before them in her house. She placed knives upon the table to peel the oranges, and then ordered Joseph to appear, arrayed in costly garments, and wait upon her guests. When Joseph came in, the women could not take their eyes off him, and they all cut their hands with the knives, and the oranges in their hands were covered with blood. But they, not knowing what they were doing, continued to look upon the beauty of Joseph without turning their eyes away from him. Then Zuleika said to them, "What have you done? Behold, I set oranges before you to eat, and you have cut your hands." All the women looked at their hands, and lo, they were full of blood, and it flowed down and stained their garments. They said to Zuleika, "This slave in your house did enchant us, and we could not turn our eyes away from him on account of his beauty." She then said, "This happened to you that looked upon him but for a moment, and you could not refrain yourselves. How then can I control myself, in whose house he abides continually, who see him go in and out day after day? How then should I not waste away or keep from languishing on account of him?" And the women spoke, saying, "It is true. Who can look upon this beauty in the house and refrain her feelings? But he is your slave. Why do you not disclose to him what is in your heart, rather than suffer your life to perish through this thing?" Zuleika answered them, "Daily do I endeavor to persuade him, but he will not consent to my wishes. I promised him everything that is fair, yet I have met with no return from him, and therefore I am sick, as you may see.
Okay, so well, let's finish reading this story before we talk about it, because you know what, this is going to get into a little bit different part of this story. So yeah, we can talk about the oranges. Again, some people may never have heard this story. It's a bizarre story because Joseph is basically put on display and proves to Zuleika's friends that this is why she can't control herself. This is why she's so messed up in the head, because she has to see Joseph every day. Look, these women are so hypnotized by his beauty that they start cutting themselves. They can't figure out, anything other than they're looking at him as they're cutting their oranges. I mean, that's a crazy metaphor of, blood, sexuality, fruit, all these things getting kind of mixed together in this image. I mean, it's hard to even like graphically represent this in a picture, but, and again, most of the artwork is Joseph being attacked by, grabbed by Potiphar's wife. But I mean, how do you even bring this image to, I mean, how do you even show this? It's
kind of like Black Swan, like that, where she's cutting herself and she doesn't know it.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of anything where women are looking like so lecherously at a guy. I mean, there was a commercial years ago.
It was kind of a trope, for the Greeks, like that women were just naturally lusty and couldn't control their sexuality.
It's
and that's why
definitely,
they had to be
there's there's definitely a Greek kind of feeling to this story in that, these women peeling oranges while they're sitting around a table sounds especially kind of kind of Greek.
Echo of the Vashti story too in here.
Yeah, I think so, a little bit. It's
That Joseph doesn't have the guts to say no, and Vashti is almost as much a slave, even though she's a queen.
Yeah,
and she suffers.
There is definitely some feelings about that with food and sitting around a banquet.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, this motif is like this weird story that kind of made its way into the I mean, whoever first wrote this story, that it got, into our consciousness, this story. And again, as I said, it's the text that Kugel uses as a, as a teaching tool, but because it's such a weird, there's such a weird thing going on here, which is that people know how much Potiphar's, so this has now become, it's common knowledge that she's not looking healthy. It's common knowledge now that she has this slave that she is so attracted to that she can't think about anything else. And so what we're left with is this story that kind of explains the power that Joseph had over her. And in a weird way, I don't want to say that it kind of, it kind of allows her some type of out that she's just human. And if all these other women can't take their eyes off of him and can hurt themselves just by looking at him, how much more so can she hurt herself by giving herself into this passion for him? So it's a weird, you got to say, this becomes part of the story that people now deal with, which is this is to some extent Joseph, her desire for Joseph becomes common knowledge, keep that in mind, because to some extent that explains why when the thing becomes known to Potiphar, that, you know, everybody already knows this. Like, he's the last to know, maybe, if we follow this stream, which is, yeah, everybody knows she likes Joseph. And it was only a matter of time before something like this happened. The fact that he doesn't sleep with her then, that there is no consummation of this, makes her story seem really unbelievable, because we already know that she's attracted to him. So there's no reason why he would attack her. So just keep that in mind, that that might be part of the logic behind this, which is to explain, why is Joseph not punished? Why do people not, why is there not a bigger reaction to this? Because, like, everybody already knew it. It was like, yeah, this was just a matter of time before this happened. All right, so let's read what's happening here.
Her sickness increased upon her. Her husband and her household suspected not the cause of her decline, but all the women that were her friends knew that it was on account of the love she bore Joseph, and they advised her all the time to try to entice the youth. On a certain day, while Joseph was doing his master's work in the house, Zuleika came and fell suddenly upon him, but Joseph was stronger than she, and he pressed her down to the ground. Zuleika wept, and in a voice of supplication and in bitterness of soul, she said to Joseph, "Have you ever known, seen, or heard of a woman my peer in beauty, let alone a woman with beauty exceeding mine? Yet I try daily to persuade you. I fall into decline through love of you. I confer all this honor upon you, and you will not hearken to my voice. Is it by reason of fear of your master that he punishes you? As the king lives, no harm shall come upon you from your master on account of this thing. Now, therefore, I pray you, listen to me and consent to my desire for the sake of the honor that I have conferred upon you, and take this death away from me, for why should I die on account of you?" Joseph remained as steadfast under these importunities as before. Zuleika, however, was not discouraged. She continued her solicitations unremittingly, day after day, month after month, for a whole year, but always without the least success. For Joseph, in his chastity, did not permit himself even to look upon her, wherefore she resorted to constraint. She had an iron shekel placed upon his chin, and he was compelled to keep his head up and look her in the face.
Yeah, he, again, she says, I'm not going to tell anybody. Why would I tell anybody? You don't have to worry about me telling anybody. But he will not give in. There's an interesting kind of lesson to this, which the Bible also contains, which is that, was Joseph really thinking about what the consequences would be long term? Because he also knows that it's human nature that it's not going to end well for him if he gives in. So she says, well, look, I'm not going to give you up because I don't want you killed. But there is this understanding that, first of all, you can't keep this from God, but you also can't keep it from, it's just the way things go. Human nature and the way things are, it will be known. People will find out. And there's also this kind of understanding that Joseph has, which is, if I do give in to her, and let's just say she gets sick of me, I have no protection at all. This idea that, when they consummate their relationship, that this is going to all be happily ever after, is not borne out by human nature, experience, what people knew, and the Bible itself. Because the Bible tells us later on in the story of David, which the rabbis knew about, when David's son Amnon rapes Tamar, as we talked about a few weeks ago, he he convinces Tamar to come visit him while he's sick. He comes to her, and he rapes her, and then he says, "Get out. I don't care about you anymore." And she says to him, "What you just did is worse than what you did when you raped me." And he says, "No, get out. You make me sick." So there is this understanding that the rabbis had that, once somebody engages in the sexual act that they've been desiring to have, and they know that it's a forbidden sexual act, because Amnon was not supposed to sleep with Tamar, his half-sister. There's no question that wasn't supposed to happen. There is this understanding that what happens in the human mind is that desire turns into shame and anger, and you don't want to be on the receiving end of this. So what if Joseph did sleep with her? She finally, feels like she got what she always wanted. It's not what she always wanted. And she says, "You know what? I want this guy dead. I want this guy out." So he knows that, again, all the ethical issues, all the, the moral ethical issues of this, there is another one, which is human psychology, which is that it doesn't happen that, these relationships, these forbidden relationships necessarily, do anything other than just continue to become dangerous and really, really not what you thought was going to happen. And so Joseph kind of understands that. Just keep that in mind too. That's a very common, it's reality. It's not a motif. It's just what happens to people all the time. And there are a lot of cases where people, have an affair, they have an attraction, they consummate it, and it does not, I don't know what people thought was going to happen, but it doesn't, it's not the love affair of all times. Let's put it that way. Very rarely does that happen. Keep that in mind. All right, let's read a little bit more of this very troubling love story.
Joseph resists temptation. Seeing that she could not attain her object by entreaties or tears, Zuleika finally used force when she judged that the favorable chance had come. She did not have long to wait. When the Nile overflowed its banks, and according to the annual custom of the Egyptians, all repaired to the river, men and women, people and princes, accompanied by music, Zuleika remained at home under pretense of being sick. This was her long-looked-for opportunity, she thought. She rose up and ascended to the hall of state and arrayed herself in princely garments. She placed precious stones upon her head, onyx stones set in silver and gold. She beautified her face and her body with all sorts of things for the purifying of women. She perfumed the hall and the whole house with cassia and frankincense, spread myrrh and aloes all over, and afterwards sat herself down at the entrance to the hall in the vestibule leading to the house through which Joseph had to pass to his work. And behold, Joseph came from the field, and he was on the point of entering the house to do his master's work. But when he reached the place where Zuleika sat and saw all she had done, he turned back. His mistress, perceiving it, called out to him, "What ails you, Joseph? Go to your work. I will make room for you, that you may pass by to your seat." Joseph did as she bade him. He entered the house, took his seat, and set about his master's work as usual. Then Zuleika stood before him suddenly in all her beauty of person and magnificence of raiment, and repeated the desire of her heart. It was the first and the last time that Joseph's steadfastness deserted him, but only for an instant. When he was on the point of complying with the wish of his mistress, ooh, what a place to stop. The image of his mother Rachel appeared before him, and that of his aunt Leah, and the image of his father Jacob. The last addressed him thus: "In time to come, the names of your brethren will be graven upon the breastplate of the high priest. Do you desire to have your name appear with theirs, or will you forfeit this honor through sinful conduct? For know, he that keeps company with harlots wastes his substance." This vision of the dead, and especially the image of his father, brought Joseph to his senses, and his illicit passion departed from him.
Yeah. So this is an interesting theme that we have in the Midrash, which is that Joseph sees an image of his father Jacob at that time, that he sees his father. This is a motif which really is an interesting one, because it shows that he still has a connection with his dad, which is good, because he's still thinking as a Hebrew. He's still thinking about his family. He hasn't, at least at this stage, he hasn't stopped thinking about where he comes from and what his family instilled within him. And this idea that he also sees his mother and his stepmother is an interesting one, because they're not alive, right? Rachel, we know, is dead. Leah, we don't know, because we don't read about when she dies. But we read in the Midrash that she died because of him, that she was heartbroken over this. But this idea that he is...
But Jacob is alive, right?
Yeah, Jacob's alive. I'm saying Leah and Rachel appear to him as ghosts, essentially, as spirits, as projections, more like Obi-Wan Kenobi and Yoda. They tell him you can't do this, and so it's not just his father speaking to him, what his father would say, but by the ghosts coming to him, I guess it's also Marley, that people are telling him, you can't go through with this. You can't do this. And so there's intervention here. So what I want to point out is a lot of this has been Joseph's inner strength, his commitment, his faith, but he gets to a point where he needs to have some outside help. And this idea that Jacob, and then other versions and extensions, that his mother and stepmother, these women, come to him and tell him, look, this story has there's a lot of, Rosemary pointed out that there's some feeling that this is a little bit like the Esther story. It sounds a little bit like the beautiful setup, the layout, this great description we have in the Midrash of what the home looked like, and what the difference between he's out in the field and he comes home and there's, this beautiful, clothing and decor, and, just your life as a slave, and then you come in here. And so it says that his steadfastness deserted him, that he gave up on, his commitment in that moment, because again, at some point he just broke down. And again, I think it kind of lends to the dramatic, tension here in the story, which is that, yeah, there's a little piece of him that's there. And I like, there's also, it's not just the fabrics and the sights, it's also the smells, right? There's cassia, frankincense, and myrrh, and aloes, by the way, all these wonderful spices. Again, you don't see whenever we think of frankincense and myrrh, we immediately go to the three wise men, right? We always go to the gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And I love that line from the Life of Brian, when the three wise men come to Brian first and give him the gifts, and give, his mother takes the gifts, and he says, "Thanks for the gold and frankincense. Come back anytime, and I can do without the myrrh." I can't say the word myrrh anymore ever again after Life of Brian without thinking about don't worry so much about the myrrh. So we don't use many of those spices anymore anyways, but or perfumes.
Gold is always welcome.
Gold and frankincense. You can hear the gold and frankincense. Don't worry about the myrrh. So they end up taking everything away from her anyways. But it is, these things are the smells too are at work here as well. So all the senses. I mean, even as we go back to the oranges, that there's a smell and a taste even to this story. So all the senses are elicited by this story in the Midrash. And so it's not just a good movie. There had to be, smell-o-vision and you have to have some food with you too. It's a really, really powerful, powerful story. So let's get into this, the visitation here. And here's what happens.
Astonished at the swift change in his countenance, Zuleika said, "My friend and true love, why are you so affrighted that you are near to swooning?" Joseph, "I see my father." Zuleika, "Where is he?" "Why, there is none in the house." Joseph, "You belong to a people that is like an ass, it perceives nothing, but I belong to those who can see things. Joseph fled forth away from the
Just know that as a Jew, it's
dead people.
it's okay to see things. Again, this also gets back to the story of Balaam that we read in the Torah portion a couple weeks ago. That normally a donkey wouldn't see things, and of course in that story, the donkey is the smart one, and the prophet doesn't see things. So that's part of it, is this idea that donkeys are stubborn and they don't see things, and so he compared her to a donkey. But so it's okay to, I guess, if you see things, you're supposed to. All right, let's read what happens.
Joseph fled forth away from the house of his mistress, the same house in which aforetime wonders had been done for Sarah, kept a captive there by Pharaoh.
Whoa. Let's stop right there, because the rabbis had just made one of these connections, like, really? Where'd you get that from? But it's a really interesting connection, which is, this is the same place where Sarah was kept a couple generations ago, right? Sarah was here in the same building and had to deal with the same kind of situation of like, that is, by the way, that is a hint of sexual harassment, though it doesn't happen. That is a male versus female, more traditional setting, though it's not implied. It's the threat of it is there. It doesn't actually happen. It is, I don't know, I guess, you could say that's also a story of sexual harassment, right? So the rabbis just tied the two together. It's in Egypt, so it could be there. Why not? So he's in the building. He's in the same building. What happens?
But hardly was he outside when the sinful passion again overwhelmed him, and he returned to Zuleika's chamber. Then the Lord appeared to him, holding the Eben Shatia in his hand, and said to him, "If you touch her, I will cast away this stone upon which the earth is founded, and the world will fall to ruin." Sobered again, Joseph started to escape from his mistress, but Zuleika caught him by his garment, and she said, "As the king lives, if you will not fulfill my wish, you must die." And while she spoke thus, she drew a sword with her free hand from under her dress, and pressing it against Joseph's throat, she said, "Do as I bid you, or you die." Joseph ran out, leaving a piece of his garment in the hands of Zuleika, as he wrenched himself loose from the grasp of the woman with a quick, energetic motion.
Yep. So a couple things there. Obviously, one is that she actually had a knife to his throat, which is, it was actually, he got close to her. She grabbed him and actually threatens to kill him. So that's like, now the final, kind of the final act is also his life was at stake. Not in the Torah, but how did he get so close to her? What was going on? She had a knife. So the weird thing is that I do want to point out is that God got involved in this as well. So when it says that God literally appeared before him holding the Even Shatia, what is that? That's the foundation stone, folks. That is the stone that holds together the world. That is the stone, as we talked about before, that's underneath the Beit HaMikdash, the temple, and now the Dome of the Rock. That's the foundation stone. So God shows it to him and says, if you give in to her, the whole world is going to collapse. Now that is a heavy-duty responsibility that again, that Joseph isn't just fighting for his own soul, for his own morality, that he is actually fighting for the human race, for the planet. So this is a really, really interesting level that this story gets taken to, because you could say, well, that's kind of over, you didn't have to do that, did you? Well, it basically is saying that Joseph, the history of humanity is literally on this relationship right now, that the history of humanity the course of humanity will be defined by this moment. Now you could say, well, that's not fair for an affair to have that kind of consequence. Well, as we talked about before, whether it's Henry VIII or, at least in the minds of the ancient Greeks, the Trojan War and Helen, that there are relationships that cause human history to go off in different directions. Remember, according to the Greeks or the Romans, Rome doesn't get founded unless Troy falls. So there are relationships that cause history to go in different directions. If Joseph doesn't wind up fulfilling his mission, the Jews don't wind up in Egypt, and they don't wind up as slaves, and Moses doesn't come, and everything else doesn't happen. So we go back to this thing in the background, which is that the reason why Joseph had to go down to Egypt in the first place is to fulfill this mission. So this is a weird kind of moment here where God basically intervenes and says, this is what needs to happen. So it's this is going on the background of why are these two people alone? Because there's a festival going on. Everybody else is out at the festival. This is the holiday, and that's why they could be together here. So we're going to finish up with this part of the story today.
Come back down a little.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, sorry.
Zuleika's passion for Joseph was so violent that in lieu of its owner, whom she could not succeed in subduing to her will, she kissed and caressed the fragment of cloth left in her hand. At the same time, she was not slow to perceive the danger into which she had put herself, for she feared Joseph might possibly betray her conduct, and she considered ways and means of obviating the consequences of her folly. Meanwhile, her friends returned from the Nile festival, and they came to visit her and inquire after her health. They found her looking wretchedly ill on account of the excitement she had passed through and the anxiety she was in. She confessed to the women what had happened with Joseph, and they advised her to accuse him of immorality before her husband, and then he would be thrown into prison. Zuleika accepted their advice, and she begged her visitors to support her charges by also lodging complaints against Joseph, that he had been annoying them with improper proposals. But Zuleika did not depend entirely upon the assistance of her friends. She planned a ruse, besides, to be sure of convincing her husband of Joseph's guilt. She laid aside her rich robes of state, put on her ordinary clothes, and took to her sick bed, in which she had been lying when the people left to go to the festival. Also, she took Joseph's torn garment and laid it out next to her. Then she sent a little boy to summon some of the men of her house, and to them she told the tale of Joseph's alleged outrage, saying, "See the Hebrew slave whom your master has brought into my house and who attempted to do violence to me today. You had scarcely gone away to the festival when he entered the house, and making sure no one was here, he tried to force me to yield to his lustful desire. But I grasped his clothes and tore them and cried with a loud voice. When he heard that I lifted up my voice and cried, he was seized with fear and he fled, and got him out, but he left his garment by me." The men of her house spoke not a word, but in a rage against Joseph, they went to their master, and reported to him what had come to pass. In the meantime, the husbands of Zuleika's friends had also spoken to Potiphar at the instigation of their wives, and complained of his slave that he molested them.
Yep. So what we have here is a conspiracy, and it's not just now going to be Zuleika coming against Joseph. It's going to be the whole group.
He organizes the whole Me Too thing.
Yeah, and it, people who have to deal with, again, not just one person, but all these people. And you know, there's a truth to this which is really scary, which is, what is somebody who's from the you know, a powerless caste, from a situation where they have no rights, they have no power to defend themselves. What do they do when they're accused of something? And you know, a lot of times people, you know, end up confessing to things or giving up on defending themselves because they really do feel that there's no way that they're going to be believed. And it does happen. It is, you know, it's not a problem that a lot of us, thankfully, have ever been in a situation. A lot of us are also appear and have, you know, physical appearance that will make us more believable and less thought to be a criminal. And again, I spent a lot of time in prisons, and I can tell you there are people who are there because of their skin color and because of their lack of credibility, because of the lives that they had. Look, I mean, on the other hand, you can't assume that somebody was, you know, was the victim of prejudice because they're in jail. I mean, sometimes, you know, kind of sometimes falsely gone the other way. But there are a lot of times when people, you know, have really nothing, they have no way to go. There's nowhere to go because they're not going to be believed. And so they end up confessing or taking a plea for things that they didn't do because they know that if they get convicted, they're going to be gone for a lot longer. So this really does happen. And Joseph is in that unenviable position, which again should remind people that, you know, and maybe that's one of the reasons why there are a lot of Jewish people that do get involved in the law and work as defenders, because they know that this is a very easy situation for people to get in. And it happened to Joseph. The version we have in the Bible is bad. This version's even worse, in that a lot of other people are now complicit in this in this situation, this false, you know, in this false accusation. Keep in mind that this is also now part of the equation, at least in the Midrash, of what Potiphar has to deal with, because it's not just his wife's word he has to take in this. So let's read what happens.
Potiphar hastened home, and he found his wife in low spirits, and though the cause of her dejection was chagrin at not having succeeded in winning Joseph's love, she pretended that it was her anger at the immoral conduct of the slave. She accused him in the following words: "O husband, may you not live a day longer if you do not punish the wicked slave that has desired to defile your bed, that has not kept in mind who he was when he came to our house, to demean himself with modesty, nor has he been mindful of the favors he has received from your bounty. He did lay a privy design to abuse your wife, and this at the time of observing a festival, when you would be absent." These words she spoke at the moment of conjugal intimacy with Potiphar, when she was certain of exerting an influence upon her husband.
Well, that's kind of weird because
Oh, he's a eunuch.
she does. I guess they had this version of it. He's not a eunuch, but this, they still could have had some kind of intimacy. The idea that she would have waited till that moment is interesting too, because it shows her manipulation of the situation. And kind of, again, if you want to know when to get a man really upset about, you know, somebody attacking their wife, say it when, you know, they're about to have sex, that, you know, oh yes. And I mean, it's kind of strange that, you know, like, it's not the first thing she says when he comes home, but it does say that she is, at least in one version, that she's physically or emotionally upset. And then when he finally, you know, when he finally hears what it is, he's even more upset. we're going to read the Midrash, which is a little different from, again, what you think about in the Torah, but let's read about it. This is what Potiphar does when he hears what happened.
Potiphar gave credence to her words, and he had Joseph flogged unmercifully. While cruel blows fell upon him, he cried to God, "O Lord, you know that I am innocent of these things, and why should I die today on account of a false accusation by the hands of these uncircumcised, impious men?" God opened the mouth of Zuleika's child, a babe of but 11 months, and he spoke to the men that were beating Joseph, saying, "What is your quarrel with this man? Why do you inflict such evil upon him? Lies my mother does speak, and deceit is what her mouth utters. This is the true tale of what happened." And the child proceeded to tell all that had passed, how Zuleika had first tried to persuade Joseph to act wickedly, and then had tried to force him to do her will. The people listened in great amazement, but the report finished, the child spoke no word as before.
Okay, so
This is what people used to have to do when they didn't have video cameras on their phones.
so yeah, there's a mystical, magical thing that happens, which is again all based on this idea that Joseph, at least in this midrash, is punished, could be killed, is about to be killed, until a miracle happens. And again, it sounds a lot like the Balaam story, which is the least likely thing or person testifies to the truth. So here you have a baby that should not have been speaking that suddenly speaks. And of course, think about how powerful it is that the baby speaks, because the baby is Zuleika's child and calls his mom out and says, my mom's lying. This is not true. So this is, this is part of, again, a stream of the Midrash, which is that Potiphar would have done what any man would have done to a slave who's being accused. He just reacts, assumes that it's the truth. The Torah seems to actually give us a different take on it, which is that Potiphar knew his wife was lying, did not need a miracle to have happen, doesn't whip Joseph. He's kind of in a situation of, well, what do I do? Let's finish up before we discuss that further, because we're almost done. We have a little bit more to read.
You want to scroll down?
Yeah, the last thing.
Abashed by the speech of his own infant son, Potiphar commanded his bailiffs to leave off from chastising Joseph, and the matter was brought into court, where priests sat as judges. Joseph protested his innocence and related all that had happened according to the truth, but Potiphar repeated the account his wife had given him. The judges ordered the garment of Joseph to be brought, which Zuleika had in her possession, and they examined the tear therein. It turned out to be on the front part of the mantle, and they came to the conclusion that Zuleika had tried to hold him fast and had been foiled in her attempt by Joseph, against whom she was now lodging a trumped-up charge. They decided that Joseph had not incurred the death penalty, but they condemned him to incarceration because he was the cause of a stain upon Zuleika's fair name. Potiphar himself was convinced of Joseph's innocence, and when he cast him into prison, he said to him, "I know that you are not guilty of so vile a crime, but I must put you in durance, lest a taint cling to my children."
So in the end, he goes to jail. Potiphar knows that he's not. Here, again, in this version of it, he is, he has no choice because he has to get himself out of the situation of his wife's a liar, but and he can't make her a liar. So we have the motif that you saw in the Quran, which is that, again, it's in the Quran, it's not in the Bible, but it's in the Midrash. So the Midrash is the middle point here, where Joseph's proven innocent by the garment itself. the garment proves his innocence, which is an amazing theme. In the Bible, we have Joseph with his coat being torn. In the Midrash, we have his garment being torn, and now it proves his innocence and to some extent saves his life in the Midrash. Again, we don't have that in the Torah. We do have it in the Quran. So this is a motif that is in the Bible, the story of clothes being torn. In this case, the clothes being torn, saving him because, again, where the clothes were torn. Again, the fact that he was torn from behind and it was ripped as he was running out is the proof. The story here is, again, one of Potiphar kind of doing the right thing. If we don't have the midrash of him beating Joseph first, Potiphar is a victim of this story too, to some extent. I mean, it's hard to feel compassion and empathy for the slave owner, if you will. But, there is a level of this in the Torah where you go, well, what's he supposed to do? He's not in a situation where, either his wife is a liar or his slave, and what's he going to do? So again, he doesn't kill him. He puts him into prison. And what a great word, durance. It's a good Scrabble word. Good Scrabble word. It's not just endurance, it's durance.
This doesn't seem like a love story to me. This is more like an obsession.
Yes.
Doesn't a love story need to be sort of mutual? Romeo and Juliet, or
definitely more of a fatal attraction
yes,
love story. It's not a story that again, I will say this is not the end of the story. You already know that. I'm not ruining the story by telling you that there is a midrash that Joseph marries Zuleika, Zuleika's daughter, and maybe Potiphar's daughter, Osnat. So there's a version of this story that I wouldn't say has a happy ending, but has a ending that's a biblical type ending, which is all's well that ends well. But not really. I mean, I don't, whatever. By our sensibilities, it's not. By our sensibilities, there's not going to be a good ending to the story. There can't be a good ending to the story because Joseph, at the end of the day, is property, and so he can't testify in his own behalf. He can't. The power dynamic is such that there is no way for this to happen that he doesn't wind up going to jail for a crime he didn't commit. So this is a really, really tough story. And again, next week we're going to start with him being in prison. But this idea of again, prison, which there weren't a lot of prisons in the ancient world. And the fact that this is the earliest story of a prison that we have in the Bible, the fact that there aren't a lot of cases of prisons, and we don't read about prisons a lot in the Bible. There are very few cases of people being held like this. Joseph, Jeremiah, there's a few people, later on, Daniel. I mean, there's very few cases of discussions about what prisons look like, and archaeologically we don't find many buildings that we can say, well, this was where a prison was. But the Egyptians did have prisons, and the Egyptians had prisons specifically for the court and for Pharaoh and his immediate group. But the idea that like society would have prisons in those days, not really. You got your hand cut off, you got your head cut off, you paid a fine.
I sent you to the galleys.
You got sent, you got flogged, you got exiled. Those were pretty much the choices. There was no, we'll send him to prison for 10 years. That's the way he's going to serve his time. They didn't have that. We didn't have that until a couple hundred years ago. The idea of somebody going away for some type of work, as slaves. Maybe that was a possibility, but not, hey, let's just see if we can get somebody, sent to prison for a while. He'll go through rehabilitation and be able to come back out. It didn't exist until even about 150 years ago. So keep that in mind, that there really is no choice for what's going to happen to Joseph other than a bunch of, there's no good ending to what's going to happen to him. So Joseph begins the next part of his life. And again, it's part of the roller coaster of Joseph's life of having it all and then losing it all. And then, the ups and downs of his life. And this is, it's definitely relevant to us today as being on a roller coaster. And again, while I would never compare our situation to Joseph right now, being on a roller coaster of confinement and being able to do stuff, there is a way of reading this tale now this year that we haven't maybe thought about before, which is, we've had freedoms curtailed. We've had our abilities to do things that we take for granted curtailed. We're not slaves, and I'm not making that equation, but living on a roller coaster and trying to figure out where your stability is and what you can do. We have a little taste of that. There's no doubt we have a little taste of it right now. So again, I don't, if anything, you can take away that, we're going to get through this because this guy Joseph got through a whole lot more. But keep in mind that Joseph's life is a really good testament to survival, to dealing with dysfunction and lack of stability, for the very least, lack of stability. So there's a good lesson and inspiration from Joseph. So he's definitely one of our interesting patriarchs, interesting biblical characters. And as you can see, a lot of Midrash about Joseph. Joseph is pages and pages, and he is in the Quran, as we said, the poetry, Islamic poetry, like Rumi, one of the great poets, Jami, one of the great Islamic poets, wrote poems about this story. It just captivated people because it's got everything. It's got love, it's got passion, drama, violence, and at the end of the day, it is a weird story. So yes, as Reverend Lynn said, it's not your typical love story, and it is not a story that again, hopefully any of you will have to live to the extent that Joseph did. But it is definitely a cautionary tale, and one that hopefully we'll take some inspiration from. So,
could I ask about the breastplate? Because if I'm remembering right, Joseph's name doesn't end up on the breastplate, does it?
Yep. So we're going to talk about that, and actually, we're going to talk about that in the coming weeks. Why is Joseph in a situation where he has a legacy that is how is Joseph going to have a legacy amongst his people? And the breastplate is one of those elements. Now, again, depending on the breastplate, depending on the list of tribes, Joseph again was not on the breastplate. Neither was Levi, and instead Ephraim and Manasseh would have been on the breastplate. Interestingly, when we talk about the tribes, we don't. Joseph is two tribes, not one. So Joseph isn't on the breastplate maybe by himself, but he is on the breastplate represented by his two sons. I will tell you, his role as a patriarch is complicated because, as we're going to see in the following weeks, everything he does, again, is part of the plan, the divine plan, but it's not clear always that Joseph is the right man for the job, in the sense that he's not like his brothers in certain ways that are necessary for him to be a tribal head, if that makes sense. Well, let me just, I'm not going to ruin anything. If you read the first line of what we're going to be reading next week, by way of punishment for having traduced his 10 brethren before his father, Joseph languished for 10 years in prison. For tattling on his brothers, he gets 10 years in prison. This is delayed punishment, folks, at least in one version of the Midrash. So Joseph is a very important part of our story, right? But whether or not he's always the hero of the story, or in the traditional way, the traditional hero of being a perfect person, you know, he got out of Zuleika's reach, but he's not always a perfect person, as we've seen already in the Midrash, and as we're going to see again with him and his brothers. There's almost a sense that he can never be with his brothers. And I don't mean that that's getting to your question about the breastplate, but there is this idea that he's never going to be of his brothers. He's never going to be one of Jacob's sons the way, and again, it's partly because it's a historical reality that we talk about Ephraim and Manasseh, not the tribe of Joseph. But there almost is this idea that Joseph isn't like the rest of the boys, and because of that, he's not going to be remembered the way the rest of the boys are. So keep that in mind. That is a theme for the rest of the text that we're going to read about Joseph, is that we know that. I mean, we've already read it, but we're really going to get back to him and his brothers soon. I mean, first we have to go through him being in prison, but we are soon going to get back to him and his brothers. And this idea that he's not really of his brothers is, I think, an important theme in the Midrash. It's definitely in the Bible, but it's blown up completely in the Midrash that Joseph is not going to be accounted like his brothers. Just kind of keep that in mind. Joseph never really comes back to his brothers. I mean, he's buried, and we talk about he wants to be buried in the land of Israel, which happens hundreds of years later after he died. But just keep that in mind, that Joseph is always kind of apart. So we're going to read next week. It's not over. The Joseph story, and even Zuleika pops up in the next Midrash, in the next series of Midrashim as well. So again, everybody stay safe. Unfortunately, I mean, I have another funeral this weekend for somebody who passed away from COVID. Bonnie Weber, known their new married name. Her mother passed away this morning, and she had many other health issues too, but she is another person that we now know she was living out in the desert, but she's originally from the valley. But she died. Bernice Sherman, the blessed memory, just passed away just in the middle of, just this morning. So she was very ill. And I had a funeral yesterday at Eden, and they said there's definitely, at Eden at least, and I assume across the valley, that there's been an uptick in death as well from this. So this is real. This is not just people getting sick. This is not just somebody else getting sick randomly somewhere else. It's happening right now in our community, 100%. So we hope that you stay safe and that you stay healthy, and that again, we were going to try to have a service outside in the park this Friday. We're not going to do that based on again what's happening right now. And again, definitely please do keep other people healthy too. Everybody stay safe. And it's good seeing everybody this morning. So thank you for making this day, at least, even though we didn't read a happy story, a story that, makes us all think, and thank you all for being there. Thanks. Good night. Good day, everybody. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Tomorrow night, 7:00 for Torah study. Reading the end of Numbers. Matot Maseh. Bye. Bye-bye.